Hello and welcome to Better Business Bureau Serving Connecticut, or as we'll refer to it more often, BBB. This show is the first of a series we'll be presenting that will focus on consumer, business, and marketplace issues, as well as scams, how to prevent them, and tips. Now, our main topic is going to be the marketplace and what BBB and state agencies do to protect and educate consumers about scams and help to prevent consumers and businesses protect ourselves from criminal activity, whether over the telephone, at your front door, or on the internet. During this series, you'll learn about how Better Business Bureau helps consumers and businesses and fosters a marketplace where buyers and sellers can trust each other. BBB is not a government entity, it's a not-for-profit organization, but we do work hand in hand with several state and federal departments. They're investigators and they're lawyers, and we do that to help track down the marketplace criminals and bring them to justice. So it's appropriate that our first guest is from the Office of the Attorney General, Kimberly Massicotte, the Associate Attorney General in charge of litigation. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Howard. I'm happy to be here.
And it might seem obvious to most people, what the Attorney General's office does. Can you give us an elevator speech?
Sure. The Attorney General is the Chief Civil Law Enforcement Officer for the state of Connecticut. Unlike some other attorneys general in the country, he does not have criminal jurisdiction, however, with a couple of exceptions, one which is relevant to our conversation today, which is he does prosecute home improvement contractors who have deceived and taken advantage of homeowners, residential homeowners. But aside from that, his general thrust is to represent the public and enforce the civil laws of the state of Connecticut, and he does that through representation of agencies that are developed by the state, of course, to protect the consumers and serve the welfare of the people of the state.
Now, I understand, for example, you folks work in tandem with many departments, but including the Department of Consumer Protection. What is the actual mechanism that will go from a consumer complaint to prosecution by the Attorney General?
That's a good question, and it can sometimes be a lengthy process and doesn't always end in litigation. But essentially, if a consumer has a concern, they're able to call either the Department of Consumer Protection or our office. Both offices have a very vigorous mediation program, and we like to resolve as many consumer concerns as we can in the mediation stage. We are not allowed to represent individual consumers, as in be their lawyer, but we represent the public. And so we're able to engage in mediation with whatever business it is that they claim has harmed them. If it can't be resolved that way, then the Department of Consumer Protection has other tools available to it short of going to court. And we work very closely with them to determine if a certain tool in their toolbox is the appropriate vehicle to address the situation. They have orders that they can issue to the business requiring them to stop certain activity, and that's all done through their administrative processes. They also have something a little less than an order, which is called an assurance of voluntary compliance. It's essentially an agreement between the Commissioner of Consumer Protection and the business engaging in the activity that is inappropriate, assuring the Commissioner and the consumers that they will stop doing the activity that the Commissioner and the Attorney General's office thinks is inappropriate. And then if that can't be resolved, if the complaints can't be resolved by virtue of those mechanisms, then we do have in the Office of the Attorney General the ability to go to court, to enforce the law, to get an injunction, and to get restitution for consumers, as well as get penalties in the appropriate case.
Rough idea, how many of these types of cases actually do go to court in the course of a year?
Very few actually get to court because the Department of Consumer Protection and their folks and the dedicated staff at our office are able to mediate complaints, quite a few of them. And by and far, businesses in the state are eager to do what's right. Fortunately, there are businesses who are willing to engage in mediation to correct whatever error was committed, and most had no intention in deceiving people or defrauding people. It's only those very unscrupulous businesses that won't listen to reason, that won't mediate with the state authorities, that actually get to court. And there are also cases where the harm is so egregious and so widespread that it is appropriate to go directly to court. To say, this Attorney General, George Jepsen, recognizes that court power is a very significant tool, and he does not go to court without reflection. He recognizes that it takes a lot of resources and that it could impair businesses. So he's very circumspect about using that tool, and he only uses it as a last resort. When he uses it, however, he uses it. He's not afraid to use it, and he's made tremendous advances on behalf of consumers by going to court or threatening court action.
It's unusual to hear that businesses are told to cease and desist with a particular type of marketplace practice. I would think that they'd be scared that the Attorney General's office would tell them or take action against them. And you are faced with these types of things. How many times will you give them a chance when they're doing something, as you say, very egregious?
Well, it really depends on what it is they're doing, how harmful it is to consumers, how many consumers it harms. Generally speaking, they're given reasonable chances and opportunities. We make sure that they're aware of the violation or what we perceive to be the violation, and we're made sure that they're given an opportunity to correct. And if they don't correct, and if there are a number of people affected by it, then we would move on to up the enforcement scale, up the tools of enforcement till we finally reach litigation.
Now, we've taken part in a couple of news conferences with the Attorney General, with Attorney General Jepsen, and it was to announce fines for companies from out of state doing business illegally in the state of Connecticut. Millions of dollars in fines, as I understand. It's a significant problem, and I suppose the question is, how does that hurt Connecticut companies when people do come in?
Sure. Well, it puts our law-abiding businesses at an unfair competitive advantage, or disadvantage, I should say. The people from out of state not complying with the law gives them a competitive advantage because, of course, they can use more resources to sell their product or to engage the consumer. It's very important for our businesses who are eager to comply with all state rules to have a level playing field with folks that are coming into our state from out of state. And that's why it's important to penalize those folks when they don't comply with the law.
But most businesses, when you do contact them, whether it's for coming over the border illegally or for bad business practice, most of them will respond to a request from the AG's office?
Most of them do, yes. Most of them do respond to a request from the Attorney General's office. There are some folks who are engaged in some terrible practices that sadly enforcement officers, law enforcement officers, have a hard time uncovering. We've all seen those, Nigerian emails asking to deposit some money in return for some favors, or assisting somebody in an African country or other countries. Those are very difficult to investigate and control against. But yes, by far and away, legitimate businesses do respond well to inquiries from our office and demands from our office.
And I imagine the consumers must be absolutely thrilled when they do find, hopefully without going to court, when they do get some sort of resolution.
Yes, consumers are very thankful, and they're really wonderful to work with, and it's terrific. It's a great day when you can go home and say that you've done something good for somebody who's been harmed. In 2014, 2015, we collected almost $200 million for consumers who are harmed directly. They receive benefits or rebates or some such thing by the efforts of our office. And that's remarkable. It's a good thing, and we're very happy to be able to do that for consumers.
That's wonderful news to hear. When we do talk about an egregious marketplace practice, what are some of the worst things that a business would do that would get your attention?
Well, I can tell you about something that's been in the news recently that a lot of folks may be familiar with, and that is the Volkswagen emissions scandal. A lot of us may own a Volkswagen and may have been impacted by this. But as people may know, Volkswagen deceived consumers and regulators by installing a defeat device in certain models of their vehicles, and Volkswagen and Audi and Porsche vehicles, which detected when consumers were having their emissions test done, turned on the emissions control during that time period so that they would pass the emissions test, and as soon as you drove out of the emissions facility, turned off the pollution control. And so people bought these vehicles thinking they were doing a good thing for the environment. They paid extra in many cases for having the emissions control, and they were deceived by Volkswagen. We allege. Volkswagen, of course, has denied the allegations. But that was a pretty remarkable undertaking. It was a multinational company, it's an international company. And that clearly got our attention, and it was intolerable. And so we joined forces, as we sometimes do, with other states in the country in what we call a multi-state investigation. And it's a wonderful way to fight those corporations that have amazing resources. As you can imagine, Volkswagen has top-notch attorneys, and they're in a foreign country, and there are a lot of protective laws that apply to that foreign country. And it's very difficult sometimes for a state on its own to pursue these egregious violations. So we join together with other states, and we pool resources. And we're a formidable foe. The Attorney General likes to say that we, as Connecticut, fight out of our weight class, and that's true. We're a very small state, but we have a tremendous influence on the multi-state investigations like VW. In fact, we were on what's called a leadership team, which means that we were able to achieve more in the way of penalties to our general fund than other states were. And I think it's a significant victory for consumers. Consumers are now going to be able to have a buyback of the affected vehicle or get the repair and have a cash settlement. In addition to that, we have $16 million coming to our general fund, which can sorely need it, and another $51 million in mitigation projects coming to the state for environmental harm done by all of this excess emission. So that's clearly an example of a case that got our attention, and we pulled out all stops in a very short time. We were able to achieve what I think is a very significant result for consumers.
It's impressive to think that a state attorney general can get involved in a multinational corporation's goings-on. And I've seen news releases from the AG's office as well from the Federal Trade Commission and other entities where they do exactly that. They talk about how Connecticut is one of the 50 attorneys general who got together for a particular complaint or procedure. What are the criteria for states' AGs to get involved in a case like that?
It is primarily done where there is a consumer problem affecting other states in the nation, a national problem, and it's affecting and damaging significantly our in-state consumers and interests. Those are the main factors in joining forces with other states. And it also is a contributing factor in deciding whether to join as to whether or not the company that we're pursuing has a lot of resources, and pooling resources among Attorney General's offices would be very beneficial in countermanding the resources of the corporation that we're pursuing.
One of the questions we're often asked at Better Business Bureau is, when do I go to BBB? When do I go to the Department of Consumer Protection? And when do I go to the Attorney General's office? Is there an easy answer for that?
I think the easy answer is you're doing a good job by going to any one of those. So don't fret. I think that it's appropriate to make a call to any one of those organizations, and I know staff in all of those organizations are adept at pointing consumers in the right place if they're not in the right place. We work very closely with the Department of Consumer Protection and the department staff, and they're very knowledgeable, and they know if we're looking at something, they will refer it to us. They watch trends, we communicate regularly, we share resources, we decide whose tools are going to be the most effective in a certain situation. And so just make the call is what I would advise, and not worry about whether or not you're making the call to the right place, because if you're not in the right place, you will be redirected. Frequently what we see, however, is that if you do call our office and the issue is something that's really regulated by the Department of Consumer Protection, for example, in the first place, we might refer you there. There are a lot of businesses that are highly regulated by consumer protection. They have license requirements. And so the action that a consumer is complaining about might be a violation of a license, and the Department of Consumer Protection might have the ability to revoke a license or take action on that license. So in that situation, we'll figure it out for the person, and we will make the referral to the Department of Consumer Protection and assist the individual consumer in figuring out what's the right number to call.
Now, you gave us the example of the Volkswagen situation, but you also will take local businesses on if they're engaging in poor marketplace practices. How bad does it have to be?
You know, it has to be bad for us to take the actions that we discussed that are court-like actions or order-like actions, or it has to affect a large number of consumers. Mostly we try, as I said, to resolve the more minor cases through the mediation process. But there are times when, there's a situation that affects a wide number of people. For example, we've been working closely with Commissioner Harris in addressing or trying to address the crumbling concrete foundation situation in Eastern Connecticut, which is a heartbreaking, awful experience for folks affected by it in that area of the state. We investigated and preliminarily could find no violations of CUTPA law. However, we do know that there are a substantial amount of people impacted to a large degree. In many cases, people's homes are in a state where they can't live in them any longer. And so we joined with Commissioner Harris in asking the companies that were initially involved in and were the common denominator among the crumbling foundations to agree to stop selling the aggregate that we believe is involved and stop pouring foundations or supplying concrete for residential homes until the legislature had an opportunity to sort out what should be done about the problem. And so we joined Commissioner Harris in issuing an assurance of voluntary compliance with those companies where they did not admit any violations of the law, but they agreed to cease and desist from engaging in those activities anyway, and we commended them for agreeing to voluntarily cease the activities that were harming these consumers and these homeowners.
Kim, we have time enough for one or two last questions. It's very frustrating, I can tell you from BBB's point of view, it's very frustrating when people are scammed. In other words, it's a criminal that's going after them, and it's not an identifiable individual or entity. On the flip side, it's a very fascinating, very satisfying thing to be able to solve a problem like this. And what for you constitutes a good day when you close your light and leave the office?
I have to say that there aren't many bad days in my job. I am blessed. A good day is when I remember the talent of the people that I am privileged to work with. They are incredibly dedicated. They are expert in their field. They do a great job for consumers. Lori Adami and her crew are amazing. She's the head of our Consumer Protection Division. And knowing that they are there answering over 2,000 calls a year of consumers, collecting millions of dollars on behalf of consumers, and understanding that every case is treated as an important matter is a good day. And that means that most of my days are really good.
That's great to hear. I'm sure that a lot of folks who are watching this would like to be able to say the same. And what is it that drew you to the Attorney General's office in the first place?
Having great days, feeling, sleeping well at night, knowing that I can make a difference, and being able to say that I love my job, which I can surely do.
And looking down the road, as we get towards Christmas and the holidays, that's a particular time of year when you folks are very vigilant about practices that can start.
Absolutely. In particular, seniors need to be very wary, and it's heartbreaking to hear some of the things that they are subjected to. The best advice we can give folks is, if it's too good to be true, it is. Be skeptical. Be watchful and trust but verify.
Thank you very, very much and for coming and joining us, Kim.
Thank you, Howard.
And I know I learned a lot in particular. So that's it for this edition of Better Business Bureau Serving Connecticut. Once again, I'd like to thank our guest, Assistant Attorney General Kimberly Massicotte. And BBB and I would like to thank Nutmeg Television and each and everyone who works here for this opportunity to share our experience with you and hopefully protect you and your family. You can share what you learn from our show with members of your family, friends, and colleagues and neighbors, because education is the ultimate tool to protect ourselves from criminals who do their best to deceive and threaten us into giving up personal information and money. Until next time, thank you for letting us into your home. I'm Howard Schwartz. We'll see you soon.